Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, your host, editor of Native News Online. Joining me today is Kristen Lilya. She's a producer of Native Bidaské, but because of today's topic, she's going to be on camera with us. So welcome, Kristen. We have a special guest today with us today in our studio here, Mark Wagner. He's the author of The Surprising History of Our First People in Golf. And Mark is a great writer. And welcome, Mark. We can have a conversation about your work and your book. Mark, I understand that Native Links, The Surprising History of Our First People in Golf, was published a year ago, back last January in January 2024. The year went by quickly. What inspired you to write this book?
Good question. And again, thank you very much for having me on. Here's the cover by Cal Nez, Native Links, The Surprising History of Our First People in Golf. I kind of a long story. I've always wanted to be a good golfer. That hasn't worked out, but I'm a good writer. And I've been writing about golf as I've tried to learn the game, and perhaps Kristen could give me some good tips. But about 2 years ago, I was writing about Lake of Isles, which is the course designed by Reese Jones and owned by the Mashantucket Pequot tribe in Connecticut. This is about 2 years ago. And I was interviewing Reese. I was also interviewing Lori Potter, the historian of the Mashantucket Pequots. And I said to myself, well, how many tribes own golf courses? And that's where it began. It began a 2-year journey.
Was it a big surprise to know a lot own golf courses?
Yeah, I was stunned. There's now 70. And in fact, at the last third of my book is a glossary of the native-owned courses.
Wonderful.
That include Firekeeper, that Levi, you mentioned earlier. Some courses up in Michigan as well. Thornberry in Wisconsin. So I became quite fascinated by this subject that golf, in addition to museums, language programs, and other things, are aiding in Native recovery. Something that I think we all would like to see. And so then I began to look into players, Native players, and that's where things really got surprising. There was a Native player by the name of Oscar Bunn, who was a Shinnecock Montauk, who helped build Shinnecock Hills, which is known as one of the nicest courses in the world. And then he played in the 1896 and 1899 U.S. Opens. So,
wow.
Ironically, representing the white tribe's millionaire club was Oscar Bunn, and with his friend John Shippen, who was a black man. The history is surprising. It's fascinating, and I think it offers an opportunity for us to find some common ground and move towards a better world. So that's where it began, and I continued to write about the courses. And in fact, maybe part 2 of this project would be to do some documentaries about some of the courses which have really sterling histories. You have Thornberry, which is the home course of the Green Bay Packers. You have Circling Raven, which has hosted LPGA events and Epson Tour events. Down there where Nota Begay is, at Santa Ana and Twin Warriors, they hold the Native American Open each year. So I think that it's really a great opportunity for all of us to push towards Native recovery and aiding each other as we go forward.
Well, and I know, like when I go to conferences, often tribal leaders are out. Let's say the conference starts on Monday. Well, Sunday they're out golfing in 18 holes, and it's quite popular among Native Americans. And as far as I know, it always has been. And so I love the idea you are bringing this to light, and the intrigue that you have. I think that a lot of our viewers will be interested in getting your book. And Kristen, why don't you ask a question? You are a golfer yourself. You golfed on the team when you went to college. So that's why I invited you on.
Yeah. I've been a golfer for most of my life. I started competitively in seventh grade, and I went to college and golfed for my college as well. So I'm excited for this conversation, and I'm excited for Mark to be here. Mark, you mentioned a couple things about the research on this book. What was the most surprising thing you found in that research?
Great question. I mean, there were surprises at every turn, Kristen, I have to say, right up until the NCAA players that I've been profiling. And you're going to get a call from me on that because the NCAA.org is very interested in this, particularly Native women golfers. I profiled Phelan Bialy, who won the Native American Open this year, Jessica Dalaboost, Gabby Lemieux, I mentioned earlier. At every turn, there's just been fascinating stuff from Oscar Bunn's history. He was a professional golfer, and he was a marquee player at the time. He was advertising in the New York Times. He taught in the Adirondacks. He set course records in Connecticut and Florida. He went down to Argentina to help build a course in Buenos Aires. And so this, I think, is surprising even for the Native community as well. That they've really enjoyed the fact that I've had the time and been lucky and blessed enough to do this research, because that is, as I said, I'm a better writer than I am a golfer. And so the writing and the research has been my way of just really communing with this history and with your communities. And so that was a surprise too, is how welcoming the Native community was. A lot of them now call me uncle, and that they invited me into their family, and they see me as a family member, which is great because I'm a white guy from New Jersey, who just wanted to become a better golfer. But I mentioned earlier Frank Dufina, recognized as the longest serving teacher in golf history, taught for 63 years at Wawashkamo on Mackinac Island. And that's kind of surprising, but also perhaps something that we could have anticipated is how, as this history becomes known, the PGA and the USGA and some of the organizations have opened their doors to this history, which wasn't known at the time, right? So in fact, there's now a portrait of Oscar Bunn painted by one of his relatives, David Bunn Martin, who still lives on the res at Shinnecock. He's a fine artist who studied with Rauschenberg and Charles Peel Wilson and others. We brokered a deal where the USGA paid for a portrait of Oscar Bunn, which now hangs. I went down and presented in Pinehurst, and it's at the Hall of Fame now in Pinehurst. So maybe surprising, maybe not surprising, Kristen, is that welcoming and that urge for everybody to see that the history. We know the injustices, right? An educated person knows the injustices, as I say in my book, are as many as the stars. That's not my focus. I've been focusing on trying to encourage Native recovery, to encourage recognition of people like Frank Dufina, Oscar Bunn, and others. So it's just been a lot of fun for me, and I just feel really welcomed by a lot of people in the Native community.
I really love the idea you have bringing amplification to these people. Let me ask you this: in your research and in your travels, have you ever discovered situations where there may be some sacred objects or sacred parts of a golf course that are truly sacred to Native people?
It's a great question, and it's not an easy one to answer, and it's not an easy one to resolve. Shinnecock, which is considered like the finest course in the world, the quote unquote Millionaires Club, there are burial sites there. I don't know if you're familiar with mound builders in Ohio.
Yes.
Where the Ohio History Project just recently won that back from a golf course, where the golf course was built on the earthworks of the Hopewell culture. It's complicated. It's a complicated history. There's been a lot of, sites that have been mistreated. And I don't really, I do tell the story of mound builders, and that's been a successful turnaround there, right? Jonathan Lowe is the professor at Ohio State who really led that charge, and the Great Circle is now part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's plenty of golf courses. We don't need that golf course on the earthworks, right? And that now has been resolved, and the course has to return that now to the Ohio History Project, which is going to oversee it returning to a sacred site, right? Because it was aligned with the moon and aligned with the solstice and the equinox of the moon and whatnot. So it's a great question, and it's a hard one to talk about, right? I mean, I just learned recently, somebody read my book and called me and said, do you know that the memorial in Ohio is haunted? And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, they put the Memorial Golf Course on a sacred site of the Wyandotte people, and it's been haunted ever since. So, one thing leads to another. I'm gonna research that, right? Because that really interests me. And what that haunting is, and whether we can nail that down. So I don't mean to trivialize it in any way because it's a really important issue. But I look for the sunny side up in my book. I think golf is a way to encourage awareness of Native history, awareness of Native culture, and some of the great architects like at Firekeeper, Nota Begay, Talking Stick and Weekapaw is Ben Crenshaw, Bill Core. They've all, in fact, Nota has served as a cultural attaché to a lot of places. They'll bring him in and say, how do we handle this in a way that honors, the tribes and honors the tribal cultures. And he has done that, I know, at Chicago in North Carolina and elsewhere. So there's a history where there's been some sites that have been run over and mistreated. But I think as we become more enlightened to Native history, there's been a real push to also honor the cultures as we've gone. So I don't know if that answers your question, Levi. It's a great question.
No, it doesn't. It's a complex question and complex answer, even as you've said. It's just so many different dimensions. I know at Native News Online, we have published over 260 stories dealing with Indian boarding schools. And one of our reporters was out in South Dakota and was covering this closed down Indian boarding schools. There's a golf course there now where literally there's a fence around some burial site. And she was there on a Saturday night. And she said, Levi, they're literally retrieving balls out of that burial site because invariably, I hit the woods, but they hit the cemetery. So, I mean, invariably, it's bound to happen. I think that each tribe probably handles these matters maybe a little differently. And some would say never disrupt the graves, therefore leave the cemetery right there alongside the golf course. And others might say, there's no problem, dig it up. But most tribes that I know, they are very, very sensitive to the sacredness and rather leave the cemeteries intact. So back to you, Kristen.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of Native American professional golfers in your book. So I have to ask you, who is your favorite professional golfer? Just to put my 2 cents in, my favorite golfer growing up was Ricky Fowler, just because he looked like me and he played golf. So who's your favorite professional?
That's a great question. One thing that's been great is a lot of the Native players are with us still. So I went down, where I began was I contacted Rod Curl, who won at the Colonial over a stroke over Jack Nicklaus in 1974. Rod Curl's a Wintu from California. It's kind of self-taught, although he got a lot of help from Arnold Palmer. I tell this story. So one of my methods was to go take lessons. And so sure enough, I went down to Clearwater, Florida, And Rod Curl, again, like, again, you asked what was surprising, so welcoming, like, oh yeah, come on down. And I thought I was going to go down and have coffee, and get his story. And he's like, no, you wanted to learn golf. We're going out to practice. And he took me out to the range for like 3 hours. And he's like, oh, he said, you got 36 things wrong with your swing.
That's funny.
Like,
I love it.
All right, well, let's get to work. And so
I probably don't want to go see him.
It was tough and it was hot. I'm like, where's the shade around here?
That's hilarious.
And so he didn't let me go. And then he then subsequently beat me badly at a putting game. He tried to teach me a putting game, but he was great fun and has an amazing story, just on how he was a construction worker. He was a very gifted athlete, baseball player. He wanted to win the hand of a woman, and her father golfed, and so he picked up the game. And
oh my goodness,
he qualified for the 1966 U.S. Open, and at that practice, he bumped into Arnold Palmer, and he said, "Mr. Palmer, can I golf with you?" Palmer was with Dave Marr, another great golfer from the 60s. And Palmer said yes. And so sure enough, Rod Curl went out and golfed with Arnold Palmer and Dave Marr. And Palmer, taught him how to hold the club and, said, hey, you got to fix your grip. And by 1970, 71, Rod Curl was an elite golfer. He had 46 top 10 finishes with one win at the Colonial, a one-stroke win over Jack Nicklaus, which, as Mr. Curl said, every boy's dream, right? Who doesn't want to beat Nicklaus by a stroke, right?
That's something you can live to tell your grandchildren.
And but anyway, that's where it began, Kristen, to answer your question. But I've met so many good ones along the way. So I also went down and took a lesson from Steve McDonald, who might not be as well known as Rod Curl, but he is a lifetime PGA member and just did so much for the kids. I mean, in Kansas and Oklahoma, and now he's in Florida. He dominated the First Nations tour for many years. He had a great story about playing with Rod Curl. Just a terrific guy who also, and when he saw my swing, said, "You need a miracle." So there you go. So I'm going to stick to the writing, right? No, Steve's just such a wonderful guy. And all along the way, Jason Montoya out at Santa Ana. I've met and played with now 2 years, Robert Comachit III, who's the great grandnephew of Jim Thorpe, who himself is an incredible golfer and incredible human being who's gone through recovery, much like Noda has, is very open to sharing that. And he's just been very welcoming. I played with him just recently at the Native American Open in October with him and his dad. And I saw him hit a ball 390 yards. I wouldn't believe it if I didn't see it, but I was there. He's just an exceptional golfer, an exceptional human being, helping so many young people out there in Oklahoma. Robert Comachit, Phelan Bialy. I'm interviewing this week Jessica Dalaboost. Phelan won the Native American Open as in the women's elite. Kristen, I'm thinking you got to go there next year. Get your game on.
I don't know about that, but we'll see.
Phelan doing just great work with the First Tee program out in Four Corners. So it's I hope I'm not carrying on too long to answer who's my favorite. The favorite story I have, really, who I didn't meet, is Orville Moody. Orville Moody was a Choctaw and tribal member. His whole family's tribal members, and he won the U.S. Open in 1969 and then won the U.S. Senior Open a number of times. And at the time, people identified him because he had joined the Army, and they called him Sarge, right? And he wasn't identified as a native. But when he won the U.S. Open, the Choctaw Nation had a big party for him. They gave him an eagle headdress. They named him Indian of the Year. And they had like a weekend-long celebration And that's kind of an interesting chapter because that history was not told at the time, right? And there's lots of different reasons for that, as you know better than I do. But I'm just happy to be able to tell that story of how his family's really proud of him. They're all enrolled Choctaw members, and he was probably the finest golfer of all that I've focused on. Right, he was apparently. Lee Trevino was a very good friend of Orville Moody, and Trevino would say often that if Orville Moody could putt, he would have been up there with Nicklaus and Palmer at that time, that he was just the best ball striker of all of them. But he struggled with his putter. And so when he took his daughter as his caddy, Michelle's who I interviewed, he started to make putts and he won the U.S. Open and then went on a tear, dominated the Senior Open with Michelle on his bag. It's a great story. She's my age now, 65, down in Texas. Her son's an elite golfer at LSU. It's a fun story. It's a great story, and it gets at that complexity of where's Native history. How was that told? How was that represented? And again, I just feel lucky to have met so many wonderful people who are willing to tell this story, and in a way that's not, in a way that's as positive as it can be, right?
Well, you mentioned the 70 or so golf courses, and so many are tied to the casino resorts that are owned by tribes. But I do want our viewers to understand it's not all about just having fun. Almost every golf course associated with Native Americans that I know that's owned by Native Americans typically will have once a year a fundraiser and have like a golf tournament, and they actually raise a lot of money for the local community. Then that surrounds where their casino resorts are, and so it's not all about just having fun. We all like to get out there. I like to go out there and hit the links. I'm not a good golfer at all, but and honestly, I wish I could get out more than I do. But I do want to emphasize that it's not all just fun and games. It's serious, and they raise considerably amount of money. And I think Native Bidaské golf tournament yields about over $1 million every year that I know about, and we've reported on it several times. So, Mark, could you comment on that? Have you heard about those tournaments that are held on the Native American-owned golf courses?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. They are Native. Some of them are just Native events, and I've run into some people and they tell tales of great golfers that aren't known, like Joe Prue was from South Dakota, he would only play Native events, fundraising events. His daughter's now a professional here in Texas.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Cassie Prue. So, the one story I do tell a chapter on is that there was a gentleman named Tom Lovell, who's from Idaho, and he organized some fundraisers. He was a good friend of Rod Curl's, a very, very good golfer. In fact, he was a low amateur one year, played at Augusta. And he was friends with Johnny Miller, who brought in a lot of people, including Bob Hope, Gerald Ford, Steve Young, Rod Curl. Native Bidaské played in some of these, and they held a series of fundraisers out in Utah. He called it Lovell's Lost Tribe, and they raised a boatload of money for American Indian Services in Utah. I think that's kind of the standard. And that's kind of legend in the community, because he brought in, the president of the United States was there, right? Gerald Ford, Bob Hope, many celebrities took part. I do focus on that in one chapter called Lovell's Lost Tribe. But the relationship to the casinos, how would I answer this? The revenue from the casinos has enabled some tribes to get into golf and build these first-rate resorts. It's also enabled them, when you look at the Mashantucket Pequots, to build these world-class archives, museums. I was reading in Native News Online about Mackenzie Scott's recent grant to a language program. So the fundraising has enabled all of these different developments, such as language programs, schools, archives. The Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Archive has won awards for its architecture. So that's where the revenue really comes in. It's not just fun and games. It's again, as I said earlier, about Native recovery. I mean, right? We want. I want to participate in Native recovery. I know the tribes are working really hard. Native News Online and Tribal Business News are great facilities to sell.
Well, thank you.
I'm reading you guys, and I first became aware of you. Someone contacted me from Tribal Business News because they had heard of what I was writing about. And you're absolutely right. It's about history. It's about recovery. It's about supporting, these really important, archives, museums, schools. I'm all for it. And you're absolutely right. I hope I'm not sounding like it's fun and games, because golf is not fun and games for me. It's no, as I said earlier, if my book does anything to encourage Native tourism, golf tourism, that's what I'm approaching some folks now about, because everyone who reads my book and talks to me says, well, that's got to be the next one, is where you go around and play all the courses and record that. So I am approaching people about, let's do that. Let's encourage people to go to Turning Stone or North Carolina or Weekapaw, and not only encourage and help Native recovery, but make people more aware of it. So I am actively pursuing that now. Now, I don't want to do it on my own, though. I want to have Native players with me and Native historians with me as I go. So that's kind of in my back pocket right now.
Well, Chris, I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask the last question.
Yeah. So my last question is, I know in the golf industry across the board, no matter what color you are, we're always thinking about ways to further the game and pass it on to the next generation. And something we say often at Native News Online and Native American culture is 7 generations. So as a mother, I've been thinking, how can I pass on this passion of golf to my 2 young boys? What advice would you give young moms trying to further the game in that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I'm only half joking when I make remarks about my poor golf game. I'm no millionaire's son. I'm one of 8 kids from northern New Jersey, and we were exposed to golf, but we never had the right size clubs. I never had a teacher. We didn't have access to the courses. And this is where someone like Native Bidaské and others are just creating these incredible opportunities that I have to say, I'm serious when I say, I wish I had that. I teach in the First Tee program now. And mentor some kids here in Boston, near where I live. And I get into this in the book, Kristen. It's a great question. When you look at the great athletes that were, in this case, mixed, Joe Louis, the great boxer, he was also a great golfer. Althea Gibson was Lumbee, black Lumbee. They didn't have institutional support, right? And Serena Williams talked about this in relationship to Althea Gibson, who became a professional golfer, right? She was the first on the LPGA, woman of color. And Joe Louis and Althea, this is all in the book, they recovered in ways that were harmful to them, right? They didn't have the support. And so, Joe Louis, to recover from a bout, would turn to alcohol and some drugs as well. Althea as well, she was tough, And so I would encourage everybody to note, what Bidaské and others are doing. N7 at Nike, Sam McCracken. Unbelievably supportive organizations and institutions. And that's what we need. I feel like if I'd had that, now I was a good athlete when I was young, but my game was soccer because all I needed was a pair of cleats, right? And that turned my game around. I'm all for sports, I was a baseball catcher, and soccer got me to college, right? But to be golf, you need access to gear, access to the courses, and what's happening now, and not only NB3, not only N7, but I have to say, I do want to put in a plug. The USGA has been very, very supportive of my project. They really love what is happening in some areas, like First Tee, like NB3. In fact, the Golf Channel is on board. So I think that what young kids need, particularly in what I call the hardest game in human history, you know this, Kristen, golf, and Levi and I can sit back and say, we don't. You could watch us and know how hard. It's a hard game, but it's a game that teaches discipline, teaches respect, teaches resilience, and so I think the institutional support from the USGA, the Golf Channel, but importantly from the Native community itself, Santa Ana Golf Club, NB3 Elite, N7, get your kids involved in that kind of thing, so that they have that support, and didn't go out there like me with my grandfather's club, which was 100 times too big, and but even from a young age, I just knew I loved being outside and being in the green and being on the land, and so I hope that answers your question.
It does. No, thank you. Levi, do you want to wrap us up?
Yes, I will. And we've been talking to Mark Wagner, who is the author of The Surprising History of Our First People in Golf. Mark, quote up that book one more time.
Yeah, Native Links. Great cover by Cal Nez, Navajo artist. Native Links, The Surprising History. It's available on Back Nine Press, also available on Amazon. And Levi and Kristen, really can't thank you enough for bringing your attention to it. I've really enjoyed working on it for a couple of years, and I think that it's a good way to celebrate a lot of what we've talked about over the last half hour. Not only recreation and the good that sports brings to young people, but Native culture, celebrating Native culture, and the "we're still here" aspect of it all. And then again, you have all these beautiful courses like Firekeeper and Weekapa, and let's get out there and get people on those courses.
Enjoy it. Yes. Well, thank you very much. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Native Bidaské. We'll be back next week with another episode. So in the meantime, it's just after the beginning of the year, new year. Enjoy your family. Give your elders a hug. And Chi Miigwech. We'll see you next week.
Chi Miigwech. If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chi Miigwech.